So yes, good morning. Welcome to this morning's breakfast session. For those of you that haven't been to our breakfast sessions before, they're a really informal, quick event that are informed by our member needs. I speak with our members a lot, find out what their sort of pain points are, and then we curate these quick morning breakfast sessions to share best practice from other members. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rebecca Groves. I'm the Skills and Talent Strategy Lead at Wide Sussex. So I have the great job of working with all of our members, understanding what your needs and what your successes are around attracting, training and retaining talent, and then working with you to collectively solve those challenges and celebrate our wins. Another part of my job is to help people who want to get into the industry to sort of take either their first steps on a career in digital, or for people who are working in the industry to take that next step in their career. So what's really unique about this morning's breakfast session is normally they're just for our member companies to attend, but Sophie has very kindly let us open up this morning's session because I thought it might have a lot of interesting advice for people who are maybe thinking about taking on a new role during lockdown and wondering how to navigate that strange process that we're all facing at the moment. So the way this morning, sorry, I keep checking my notes. The way this morning will work is I have a set of questions that I'm going to run through with Sophie. Also, I'd love to hear questions that you have. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to pop them in the chat function. If you don't know where that is, it's sort of at the top right-hand part of the screen next to the clock. If you click in on there, you can pop in any questions that you have, and then I can put those to Sophie for you. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off, and I would like to welcome Sophie Davies-Patrick, who is the Chief Technology Officer at BPM. Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, and that's mbp.com.
I'm sorry.
Okay, don't worry. It's fine. It's one of the few 3-letter domain names still trading, which is great. Kudos to our founder. Absolutely. So hi everybody. Sophie Davies-Patrick. I've been working in the technology industry all my career, essentially, starting as a programmer back in the day, and sort of working up through project management, and then latterly leadership in a variety of industries, big and small, and a variety of sectors. And as Becky just told you, I recently, in the 1st of April, started a new role at a local company, MPP.com, which is the world's largest marketplace for photography and video equipment, based here in Brighton.
Brilliant. So I wonder if you could tell us, is this, you've given us a sort of overview of your career. Is this the first time that you have started a role sort of remotely, the first time you've been through that whole process without actually meeting anybody?
Yes and no. So about halfway through my career, I started a role for a company whose headquarters was in America, in Silicon Valley, Yahoo, who at the time were the biggest company in search. So this was a while ago, sort of 2007, I think I started there. Whilst Yahoo did have a presence in London, the vast majority of the team was based over in Silicon Valley. My boss was there, my immediate peers were there. And I also had reports there, and I had reports actually in Asia as well, in Taiwan and a couple of areas where Yahoo was big at the time. So I did have an office to go to in London, and I did have people to meet, but they weren't people I was kind of going to be working with quite so directly day to day. So it was a similar situation, although not quite as extreme, I'd say, as when I started at MVP.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we're all sort of getting used to this strange world of video conferencing. How have you found were you interviewed over video? How did you find that process?
So I actually, because of my previous role, had a 3-month notice period. I actually was interviewed and accepted the job in December or January this year. So that was prior to the coronavirus outbreak. So it was a fully face-to-face interview based in sort of coffee shops and then the office here in Brighton. So that part of the interview process was not virtual at all. However, subsequently, when I was interviewing for the Yahoo job, as I referenced previously, I had sort of several video interviews in that case. And I've also been recently interviewing remotely for a role to join my team. So not for this role, but it is something I've worked with in the past.
And do you think there's any sort of clear differences between being interviewed or interviewing someone on a video conferencing system?
Yeah, there's some pros and some cons to it. So, for example, for the role that I've recently been interviewing, I partnered with one of my team. And normally, when you're interviewing someone, throughout the interview, you sort of start to gain an impression, start to think about areas that you're, really impressed with, or areas you'd like to know more about. And in a face-to-face interview situation, you can't share that with your colleague. You have to sort of try and direct them in sort of more ninja mind trick ways and, see if they can understand where you're trying to go with this interview. However, when you're interviewing remotely, because you're sharing a Google Doc for notes, which is the way we approached it, actually it's great because you can chat during the interview a little bit. Clearly you're focusing on the candidate, you don't do it much, but you can sort of, say, oh, let's ask him, I'm going to ask him about this next, or I'm a bit concerned about this, or he's really acing the other. Whilst, your focus would always be completely on the interviewee, it allows a little bit more collaboration, I think. So that was an interesting bonus I wasn't expecting. In terms of the cons, I found you have to work harder to get to know the candidate. When you're interviewing face-to-face, there's enough to be a bit of small talk, chat around, hobbies, or, where have you come from, or the weather, all the things we talk about to break the ice. And the video interview doesn't always allow for that. So I found that actually putting those questions really in your list, just to get to know someone a bit more, is actually a really good way to mitigate for that.
That's really helpful, thank you. And sort of along the similar lines, I think when you start a new job, so much of that sort of onboarding process and learning on the job is through the relationships and the sort of informal knowledge gathering. How have you gone about that since starting your new role?
You definitely have to work harder. So I sort of took some of the learnings I had from the Yahoo experience into this situation. And to a certain extent, I was expecting kind of some of the things that I found tough. But actually, given everything else that was going on, and I found whilst meeting my team virtually that there's as many kind of reactions to the coronavirus pandemic and as many family situations as there are people. So given that, it did add another layer of complexity. And, again, I found that I just had to find ways to work around. I read some great advice, actually, from Matt Mullenweg, who is the founder of WordPress, who basically runs the entire company pretty much online. And that really helped me. If you're interested in the blog, it's ma.tt. And he talked about the 5 levels of remote working and how companies can become more mature. And one of the things that I noticed from his blog was he said, well, think about what you'd actually do in real life, in person. And replicate it online. And that was really good advice. And I found out the 2 things I was particularly missing was the relationship building, as you said, Rebecca. And I thought, well, we use Slack within MPB. It's our kind of communication of choice. So whilst it would be lovely to just pop into the kitchen whilst a quieter member of the team was there making a coffee and just take the opportunity to get to know them a bit more, I can't do that. So what I can do is just find a reason to reach out to them on Slack. I made sure I had one-to-ones with everybody in my team, and really took the time to get to know people a little bit initially, but I kept coming back to it rather than having that conversation and walking off. So yeah, I was very intentional about building those relationships. That was the first thing I learned. And then the second thing that I really missed, which I wasn't expecting quite so much, is the intangible knowledge gathering that you get just by sitting in an open plan office. So as you're learning a new role, there's sort of, I'd say, 2 big areas of learn. There's the people themselves, but then there's the product or the technology itself as well. And whilst you can be given great overviews by your team, it's only by repetition and a lot of kind of intangible knowledge gathering that you really quickly upskill. So what I actually did to mitigate that was I joined Slack channels that I wouldn't normally have joined. So for example, our testers collaborate in a Slack channel called Test Chatter. Now normally the CTO would not need to be in that channel. Those testers are great, they've absolutely got it covered. But I explained to the team I wasn't joining to check their work, absolutely not. It was for my benefit. So I don't join, but I just keep an eye, and I understand where the work's happening, and I'm starting to understand better the terminology that's used, and just by constant repetition. So that can be quite, I'm going to say, noisy. When you're in an office, you're kind of used to tuning out on it. So what I actually did on Slack was I turned the notifications off, because I felt that having all those channels, being bombarded, it just got a bit much. It's an exhausting time at the best of the time. So I actually turned the notifications off, and I check Slack several times a day. And that actually just helped to cut down that noise, but also helped me just slowly to gain knowledge of what was happening within my team.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you. And I think you were touching upon it before, but in your new role now, you've gone from being the new recruit to recruiting the new recruit. And so I wondered what are the key things that you learned through your process that you're now applying to the role when you're recruiting people yourself?
Absolutely. So another area that I had to think through how I would approach is understanding the company culture. So again, that's something that you just gain by being in the office and getting to know people. What's the attitude to, people coming in at certain set times versus setting their own hours? What's the attitude to, how informal versus formal we are in certain types of meetings? So there's a lot of things that companies just do within their DNA which can't be taught. So what I did was I figured out kind of quite early on a few people who I just hit it off with, who I got on well with, just naturally, click with some people straight away and others takes longer. And those people who I clicked with, I would constantly be pinging them, not constantly, but I would regularly be pinging them just to ask advice. So these weren't people in my management line, that's not always appropriate, it's peers or people sort of elsewhere. For example, the head of people was really helpful. He was somebody who sort of understood the culture and really wanted people to feel comfortable. So I often took his advice, like, I need to talk to so-and-so about this. How do you recommend I position it? How do you think this would go down? How do we do things at MVP? So having 2 or 3 people who you feel comfortable and safe with, that you can ask those kind of questions without feeling, without feeling you're being too stupid, was really helpful. And I think when my new staff members start, I will be absolutely passing that advice on to them, and perhaps assigning them a buddy, somebody who they can, or perhaps they can choose one. We'll figure that out. But someone who they can, who is, who's clearly tasked with supporting them in that kind of cultural upskilling.
Yeah, I think that buddy system I've heard elsewhere, and I think particularly in these sort of difficult times, I think that the feedback I've heard is that is really helpful to both the employee, but also for the employers to feel like they've sort of got that support mechanism there. I'm aware that I've asked a huge amount of questions. Are there any questions from anyone on the call that you'd either like to unmute yourself and ask, or to put in the chat and I can ask for you? Nothing yet. That's fine. We can carry on. And if you do think of anything, then please do feel free to pop it in the chat. I think one of the questions that I'd had sort of just around the practicalities, I think, of applying for work is people were thinking about, will my notice period, will my probation period be extended? How will I be sort of judged? Do you have any sort of anything you can share on that, and maybe any anxieties that you'd had that maybe were or weren't realised, or anything that you're sort of conscious of when you're recruiting yourself?
Absolutely. So one thing that I found was a gap, I'd say after about 6 weeks, was I wasn't getting a huge amount of feedback. If you meet people regularly, you can read their body language, you can just really get a sense of how you're doing, and that's hard to get remotely. Even if you meet people regularly, there's always a lot to talk about, and you may have differences of opinion, which is absolutely fine. You expect to be able to talk through these things as you're kind of forming an approach, but without that sort of feedback in terms of that you get face to face, it's kind of hard to judge how I was doing. So I actually took time in my my following cycle of one-to-ones, both with my team, so downwards, and with my boss as well, to actually specifically ask for feedback, kind of stop, start, continue. Normally you'd expect to do that after 3 months, but actually I felt after 6 weeks that was a good time to do that. I let everybody know I was going to be doing that, because some people, well, many people like to prepare for, you know, feedback and to think through what they want to say. So I just dropped everyone a note to say, look, hey, I'm going to be asking for stop, start, continue. And it just gave me a few pointers. And I think the other advice I'd give would be to really agree what success looks like. In any role, it's really good to know where you're going, particularly remotely, where you're kind of navigating additional complexities. So, you know, speak to your new leader, your new boss, and say, well, in 3 months, you know, what would success look like for you or for us and for me in this role, and have that conversation explicitly, and that will help keep you focused. So yeah, I mean, feedback's a great thing to be focusing on, you know, whenever, but particularly now, it's time to kind of go over and above. And I think that theme of preparing is kind of a key one as well, sort of more generally. When I was interviewing with the candidates for the role that we've recently posted, I took the time to really reconfirm that it would be a video interview, to ensure that they were somewhere where it could be video, but I also let them know that it's absolutely fine if family interrupt or pets interrupt or, you know, delivery drives interrupt. That's the world we're living in. So, you know, hopefully that put them a little bit at ease in terms of their particular situation. And also, I took care to use a video app that was possible on phones and laptops. You know, you can't assume that everybody has access to a laptop, for example. So you need to be able to democratize that. And I also sort of left it open to say, look, let me know if this is going to be an issue, and we'll figure out what we can work around. Video is a key point, actually. I think one of the things I did quite early in my team meetings was to request that everyone use video. We have stand-ups in the morning, which I joined every day, and, you know, not everybody naturally wants to put video on first thing in the morning in the best possible world, but I felt it was something I really had to request that people did, because particularly for me, getting to know my team, but also just to keep that team spirit alive. In the early days, we weren't aware how long lockdown was going to start, so we needed continue. So we needed to put in place sustainable practices that would kind of carry us through as long as it needed to. So that was something I kind of politely requested everybody in my team did. And I think that's a reasonable request if you explain why it is. And that was true during the interviews as well.
Thank you, that's brilliant. We've got lots of questions popping up now, so I'm going to run through some of those. So Nick had asked, how long have, sorry, I should have asked this question to begin with. How long have you been in your role now? And also, how long has it taken to sort of feel fully up to speed and onboarded? Absolutely.
So I started on the 1st of April, which was basically the first week of lockdown. So pretty much a difficult week for absolutely everybody on this call, I'm sure, for many, many different reasons. I took the time prior to finishing my previous role to have a conversation with my boss, an open conversation about, firstly, you know, how's the company doing? And he reassured me that the company was doing very well and was solvent, and there's absolutely no concerns about that. And it was very well placed to weather any economic storm that was coming. So that reassured me. So I did that, and then I also just decided to take a couple of days in between my previous role and my new one, just to get my family situation a little bit sorted. So although I started on the 1st, I think it was something like the 4th or 5th, and I actually started in the office. But yes, since the beginning of April, I've been in for 3 months. I'd say for any new role, it really takes kind of 3 months to properly settle in. Sometimes can take even longer. My previous company I worked with, American Express, I was advised early on that actually it could probably take up to 6 months before you really know what's going on. And that was helpful advice for a large company, because there is a lot to learn. But I'd say for a smaller company, MVP has around 150 staff. I'd say sort of 3 months is reasonable. And it really has taken me that 3 months. I'd say the first month was everybody was learning together how to work remotely, as well as me learning how the team worked and the product worked and so on. And it's only in the last couple of months I feel I've actually started to get that traction.
Brilliant, thank you.
Time would be my advice. You know, don't take it on the second week.
Yes, yeah, I think that's something in this fast-paced environment that there is now sort of coming into the remote working. I feel like that sort of the speed that we used to have in the office, we're starting to expect remote working. And I think that's a really good point to just remember that this is all new. And if you're starting a new role, it's new on you, which is going to take even longer. So Good point. There was a question from George. I don't know if you're able to answer this one, which was, what's the best way to show a portfolio of work during a virtual or video interview, especially for creative roles?
Well, really good question, George. So the role I was interviewing for at that time was not a creative role, but you know, who knows in the future. So I would say that probably it's the interviewer's job to let you know what they're looking for. So what type of creative work they're interested in seeing, whether it's a kind of blue skies ideation or whether it's more kind of, you know, clear structured deliverables. So don't feel bad about asking in advance what they're particularly looking to see. And then I'd say take some time to prepare a way to share it digitally. So, you know, who has a scanner at home? I certainly don't, but most people have phones. You can take photos of your work if it's drawn work, or it may be digital already. You know, and plan something that tells the story that you want to see about yourself. So I'd say, you know, 5 to 8 to 10 pieces that really you feel shows you to your best advantage and encapsulates what you're about as a creative, and prepare that, have that ready, maybe have access to a few other pieces as well in case you ask specific questions, but really try and take the opportunity to shape the interview. It might even be worth having a conversation, if it's possible, by email beforehand with the hiring manager to say, look, hey, this is how I'd like to approach things. I'd like to spend 5 or 10 minutes taking you through things that I feel show me off well, and that would allow the hiring manager to figure out if that's an appropriate approach. But certainly if I was hiring creatives, I think that would be something I'd like to see, rather than me asking questions and then answering. I would like to give them the opportunity to kind of direct the conversation for a short while.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Also, George, we, as part of Talent Fest, we put together a blog on creating sort of excellent portfolios, and a lot of that applies to virtual as well. So I'll include a link to that in the follow-up email to this event. So a question from Vicky was, if you're recruiting a trainee, do you think that they would suffer in the new remote working environment? And how, as an employer, do you ensure that they still gain all the relevant learning experience as the trainees would before them?
Absolutely, great question, because I have actually been thinking recently about whether or how we can take on an apprentice within my team or my organisation. We've regularly throughout my career, I've been worked with apprentices and paid interns, and I think it's great for everybody. It helps the people who are coming up through our industry, but it also helps those who are looking for within my existing team, who are looking for their next challenge, perhaps want to try out team leadership or mentoring skills. So I'd say really the recruitment, you know, recruitment approach would be similar, whether it's a senior role or an apprentice, all the things I've shared up to now. In terms of onboarding them, I'd say do take extra care. I find that people who are quite new to the offices or the work environment perhaps need linking and labelling a little bit more to sort of how we work as much as the work we do. For example, in previous roles, I've had an apprentice who didn't know really what email was, as an example. So it's something that, you know, I would use day to day, and it would go without saying to me, but actually having discovered that makes you realise that, you know, skills that people have are really varied, and you really should take the time to kind of really help them understand, you know, how we work. In terms of the what we do, really having a close buddy, again, is absolutely the answer to that, and really making it clear to that buddy what success looks like when they are working with the apprentice, and supporting them if they're perhaps new to it. Having regular check-ins with them to make sure that they are comfortable with their role as mentor, and that the apprentice is also getting what they need. And I'd say to employers and apprentices, for the first 3 months, you know, be realistic about what's possible in terms of the apprentice contributing. Of course, we want them to contribute because it's good for their learning, but, you know, don't expect that their output will be the same as, say, a junior on your team within the first 3 months. So, yeah, set them up for success, really think it through. Be explicit about what you'd like them to do, and also consider some formal training if possible, whether it's time for them to do self-study in something like Pluralsight or Udemy, or whether it's potentially a paid course if that's appropriate.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left and 2 more questions that would be great to get through if we can. One was from Sally, which was, we're implementing a lot of the things that Sophie is recommending, which is brilliant. However, our most recent starter has asked if/when we'll be returning to the office. He thinks he'll benefit from being in the office, listening to any conversations, etc. Any advice here?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about this a lot as well, Sally, actually, because with the world opening up, and definitely various people on my team have expressed exactly the same. It's a social environment, and not only do they work better, they also enjoy it more. So within our company, we've taken a 50% approach where we will be inviting the teams back in bubbles. So what we'll do is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my team are invited to the office. On Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, the sales and marketing team, for example, are invited to the office. And we will ensure that we don't share seats. So I would sit in the same seat every time, but everyone else on my table who works in other teams won't be in that day. So our office manager has gone to great lengths to figure out a safe way to do that. But we are really clear that it is an invite only. We are not at the moment in any way mandating people to come back to the office, because we recognise there's many sort of family situations and health situations which mean people are not always comfortable with that, and government advice remains to remote work when possible. So we're opening the office for those who wish to use it on a 50% basis. So that might be something you could potentially consider. The other thing we've been thinking about as well, we're lucky in Brighton, we have the beach, and weekends aside, there's usually some space to be found. So we're considering kind of team meetings outside as an example, where we can just meet and greet people. I know that won't necessarily help your team member who wants to work with other people, but hopefully that will help them at least get to know people. So a few kind of creative ideas like that would be worth considering. And there's really great advice actually on the government website about how to make an office COVID secure.
That's super helpful, thank you. I think maybe a final question was, is it normal that a recruiter asks the salary question to a potential candidate right at the start before they've revealed the actual salary? Oh, that's a very sort of specific.
So recruiters sometimes are asked by the hiring leader to screen candidates to just get an understanding of what their expectations are within budget. So, for example, if somebody is wanting sort of twice what the budget is for you to pay, then it would, politely speaking, not be worth their while. Continuing that conversation. So I think it's often used not as a negotiating point later, but just to check that their expectations are in line. I think in Brighton that's sometimes appropriate because the London people who are maybe coming from elsewhere, such as London, their salary expectations can be a bit different to what's possible down here. So I think it's a bit, I'm going to say, slightly impolite for small companies to ask it straight away early on for all roles, but occasionally it is appropriate. If you see someone who's very senior applying for your role, it might be okay to say, here's a range of the budget for our salary. I just wanted to check that's within your expectations. I think that's how I'd position it if I was having that conversation, if I needed to have that conversation up front.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we've managed to get through all of the questions that people have posted, and I'm always very keen to end these morning sessions on time because I know people have busy mornings. So is there anything, Sophie, that I haven't covered that you really wanted to say?
Yeah, I think my final point, really, I'd just like to close by saying, technology is a global industry. People have been working remotely for many years. We're an innovative industry as well. So I'd just say we've got this, we can solve for this. I'd be positive about the fact that we can do this, we can get through. And yes, there's many intangible things which aren't perfect, but we can work around them and solve them for as long as we need to. So yeah, I think we can get there.
That's a really inspirational way to finish. So thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you to everyone for joining us. We've recorded this session, as I said, so we'll send you an email link with a link. So we'll send you an email with a link to the video, and I'll also include that link to the portfolio advice. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop me an email and we'll see what we can do to help. So, and I meant to say also, as Sophie mentioned, they are recruiting at the moment. So I'll also put a link to the roles that that Sophie has within her company too. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.